Yeah, quick recap. I've been 22 years in the industry. I've worked at a number of larger publishers, launched a ton of games out there. This is a picture of the very first game that I worked on, FIFA Soccer 94. It's amazing coming full circle right now. I just looked at the new FIFA on, on the iPhone, and it looks way better, and it's in 3D. So the industry has come a very long way since I started. When I started out in these games, it was interesting because team sizes were around 6 people. And the game development cycles were very, very short, sometimes even around 6 months. It almost felt like back then we were making casual games, as my experience is right now. So it's kind of for me, the whole industry sort of come back to where I started out 22 years ago. During that time, I watched as the team size grew from 6 to 100, and we were using motion capture, 3D scanning technology. We had celebrities coming in. But I also got to watch around 2000 as the big giant companies started to fail. The budgets started to blow out. There's a lot of disorganization. And part of that onset allowed for sort of a new breadth of game titles, which was sort of more the casual game, which is a little bit of a safer bet for the big publishers. Rather than spending $30 or $40 million, they're spending $3 million. So you're looking at sort of a recap here. Around 2003, I got my taste of my first real-time strategy game at LucasArts, a game called Galactic Battlegrounds. When I started playing that, I knew exactly the games that I wanted to focus in on. 2004, I joined Take-Two, and we worked on a game that remains unpublished. It was called Snow. It was a great little drug dealing game, perfect for the kids. This game was it was a very casual RTS game, very simple buttons. It was going to be played on console systems. And as I started to get into the real-time strategy games, I realized that, because I'm not the best player, I like this idea of making it a little easier to play. And so as I was always developing these games, I was always thinking, how is there a way that we can make these more accessible to a wider audience? After Take-Two, I joined Gas Power Games, started working on even more hardcore RTS games. And I'd say, surprisingly, Supreme Commander is probably as hardcore as you're going to get. You're going to be micromanaging thousands of units, your economy, everything. Basically, it was a game that did very well, but it had a very limited hardcore audience to that. As we went along, the industry started changing. So in 2010, I got into Supreme Commander 2, and I really wanted the idea of putting out not just DLC. I want to actually be able to get into the game engine that was live and add new units in. And we actually did achieve that. So that, for me, was sort of my first experience as games as a service. Because at the same time, casual games, if you remember around that period, casual games were already starting up. At that point, we had a lot of web games. They were doing constant updates, and I was very, very jealous of them. The next game that I went on to was Age of Empires Online. That was a true free-to-play game where finally collecting analytics and making meaningful changes in the game for what the fans wanted. So that was a very, Age of Empires was also a pretty hardcore franchise. And Age of Empires Online, we want to make that accessible by as many people as possible. So right now I'm working on Game of Thrones. Fortunately, I can't talk about it right now, although I'd love to. Getting around sort of 2009, the popularity of strategy-like games really started to flourish. A lot of these games were based on older designs, like harvesting games, tycoon games, simulation games, tower defense games. And what I was watching around then is strategy games were populating the web, Facebook, mobile. People want to play the strategy games fast, and they didn't want them as big as before. So there's a real traction to these kind of games. And again, the large PC strategy games were starting to fail. We were actually watching a lot of the big publishers, and I'm not going to name names, but a lot of our big strategy games that had these large budgets just couldn't compete anymore. They were losing ground. So we had to start thinking about new ways. I'm going to skip over a couple of slides here because I'm going to eventually start running out of time here. But looking at sort of that casual audience getting into the strategy game, it sort of seemed to be that it wasn't really about the time that they were spending in it. It was more about the mastery of the game. Part of that, looking at sorry, my slides sort of have a mind of their own here. So part of that is, people want to have mastery over time. Because if I look at games like Candy Crush Saga, people are clocking in as many hours into that game, well, actually more so than they would actually a hardcore strategy game. So, taking into a lot of these things that I'm seeing in the industry, what I really want to do as a producer and a game developer, and my slides are like very, so hopefully that stays up there. So these three circles are what I really want to focus in on today. Is you see the casual, core, and hardcore. So hardcore, that's my experience. That's these big RTS games that I work on. I get a little bit of the core audience in. I don't get the casual, but I want to squish these together as much as possible. I haven't yet found that magic solution to getting them close together, but I'm watching other people do that with casual games. So, games, for instance, like Clash of Clans may not get the hardcore, but they start out with the casual, and they're squishing all of those circles in together. For me, I still want to make a hardcore RTS game. I don't want to abandon that, and I don't want to abandon those fans, but I want to make it as accessible to the casual player as much as I possibly can. That's been, over the last 6 or 7 years, that's been my whole focus, working with design teams saying, that's great, the hardcore players are going to love that, but can we noodle around with this over here so we can make it a little bit more accessible to the casual player? And I'm going to focus in on sort of the two games, a bit of Supreme Commander 2 and Age of Empires Online, and there's a couple of other games I worked on in between that haven't hit the market yet or were canceled. But mainly, one of the things I want to talk about with Supreme Commander 2 is, it was a game that we also had to put on the console. So by virtue of the fact of taking a PC game, putting it on the console, you have to make the controls a little lighter than they would be on the PC. So Supreme Commander 2 wanted to increase the market share. And part of that we did that. We took away a lot of the real micromanagement in the game. In doing so, we did lose some of the hardcore players. Some of the hardcore players just love to micromanage, and it's hard to make a game that's all things to everybody. But what we did get is we streamlined the controls so we could easily port that over to the 360, and then we gained console players. So it kind of all worked out in the wash, but not as well as we had wanted it to be. The great thing is that we could actually patch in updates to bring back some of the original designs. Back then, we didn't have analytics. The forums were our analytics. So we'd go to the forums and read each day and go, people seem to be pissed off. Let's see if we can make a change to get them happy. One of the things that we did, because we didn't have analytics, so the image on the left is the original Supreme Commander. There was no 3D in there. It was all faked. Some of the units were 3D. But what we focused in on is huge unit counts, thousands of units. We made a decision in Supreme Commander 2 to make the world more beautiful. To do that, we made it full 3D. That was at the sacrifice of the units. So we didn't have as many units in Supreme Commander 2. That was one thing that we did start to lose a lot of the real hardcore players. They wanted those units back. And so that was a bit of a misstep on our part of not having the analytics to go in and see, hey, the fans find it more important not to have so much beautiful artwork, but to have as many units. Casual players, they do want to see a very beautiful game to be played. They're less about having thousands of units. They're more about quick, fast gameplay. Age of Empires Online, that one was the whole focus, creating a mainstream RTS, free-to-play MMO with good KPI. Again, on that one, I think we made some good inroads into making that game more accessible to casual players, but they still found it very difficult. They found the quest very difficult, so we were constantly looking at the analytics and adding in things to allow those players to get through the games quickly. So in some cases, we just added consumables that allowed them to beat enemies, and so they can spend money on these consumables and grind through all of their quests. In my mind, that was a good thing. Players liked it, but I felt that was a little failure on our part to make a game that was truly mainstream. We were constantly simplifying the UI. Again, on this game, we even faced the same issues as we did with Supreme Commander 2. if you look at the old version of Age of Empires, it was sort of a stylized realism. The new version was a little bit cartoony. Again, hardcore players are very fickle. They equated that the new cartoony look was that we just dumbed down the game, which actually wasn't the case at all. The game was sort of ever much as complex as the original title. So, one of my points on there is focus, test early, and listen to your players. If they don't like that imagery from the get-go, you might want to look at some of the other options. One of the other things that we had with Age of Empires is, we still had sort of this very casual game look to the title, but if you want to go in and craft something, you've literally got to go to 3 buildings, and people found this very confusing. The casual players just couldn't get it. We had to put in a crafting guide so they understood it. They still found it very difficult to navigate the system in the game without huge amounts of tutorials. So in that case, making the UI readable, didn't give us much benefits. So because I'm focusing in on real-time strategy games, I'll just go back for a second. In real-time strategy games, for the most part, there's a couple of things that casual games don't really focus in on. That is, heavy amounts of crafting, tech trees, and sort of those are sort of the 2 things that a lot of the traditional RTS games focus in on. Usually they're very complicated. This one here is Sprint Commander, the original one, the Cybern tech tree. Good luck if you're a casual player understanding that. With Sprint Commander 2, we made it very simple. We gave you a point system, said, hey, you've got 3 points to spend. You can go through this menu system here and gear up your units to the next level. And for the most part, this was actually really good, and it worked on the 360 as well as on the PC. So this part of the UI system was something that we focused in on, and we did find that the casual players liked that. Same thing with the Age of Empires tech tree. Very readable, very understandable, and we didn't deviate from the original Age of Empires tech tree much, for that. The original one was still a little gamey. The other thing that we want to make sure we don't do is we don't punish the player coming in. Sort of the worst thing that you can do to your casual players coming in. For the first time they play your game, they bork the economy, they can't spend units, they've got to restart the game. So you don't want to punish them immediately for their bad decisions, but you also want to allow the experienced RTS players enough at the start of the game so they can start making strategic choices, even in the tutorial, to start feeling like they're progressing ahead, and so they're not so annoyed that, oh, I've got to grind through 10 levels of really stupid gameplay here just to get to where I want to get. And the economy needs to be easily understood by everyone. It doesn't require an MBA to understand it, unless, of course, you're going to go after that really casual audience. And I do want to call out, again, Clash of Clans. It integrates your tech trees into the buildings, has a really easily understood economy. And I think that has got to be part of the big success of this game. I do look at Clash of Clans as, while not a real-time strategy game, it is a strategy game, and it does compete with the bigger titles, and I guarantee you it has taken money away from some of the bigger RTS titles with its market share. You probably have a lot of hardcore players going, I can just play this on my phone. I love RTS. It's a good tower defense type game. So the other thing that I've learned is the ease of entry. You want some well-defined, quick tutorials. Age of Empires had some great tutorials for the gameplay, but we kind of forgot to show players how to use the UI. And that was a bit of a misstep on our part. And we also had to dial back on the game strategy acronyms. There's a lot of stuff that we want to go, oh, the hardcore players know this, but the casual players don't know a lot of the acronyms that we use or some of the gaming languages, and localization will love you for this. So the game entrance, call it funnel, and the game tutorials, whether it's for hardcore or casual players, you got to keep it simple to get into the game. Age of Empires, this is great. You have a play button, marketplace button. You hit play, you're getting into the game. This worked really, really well, but before this, if you were a new player, you literally had 20 minutes of trying to get into Xbox Live. I hope no one from Microsoft's here because they'll probably want to talk to me after that. But literally that funnel, we could see the churn happening very, very fast as people were going through the sign-up process. it's amazing, like one more line that you have to enter in data, you'll lose another player. Another player like, forget it, I'll leave. If you force them to put in a credit card, they're done. So for me, for all the games that I've worked on afterwards or helped out in the design of, is like keeping this funnel really crisp coming in. Doesn't matter how big the game is. Also, if you can and your game supports it, having an easy mode or an area where the casual players can feel comfortable and feel like they're succeeding. So in Supreme Commander 2, we had an easy mode, tough to lose. You just had a couple of units, really easy objectives to do. At the same time, if you come in, you can go into insane mode where you've literally got thousands of units attacking you. You have very little chance of succeeding, and for a lot of the RTF players, they like going in there and trying out their different strategies, and they don't mind being punished, which is a fine thing. So I want to make sure so some of the things that I'll focus on that did not work. Again, you're trying to make the same end game features for the casual and the hardcore players. You want to focus on the ones that are going to matter over the long haul. For instance, in Age of Empires Online, there was sort of a delicate balance between the sort of casual players in there and the hardcore players. Hardcore players, they were the guys given money, and they were also the guys staying in the game the longest. So when you're doing your next patch, you're like, I think we should give something more for the hardcore players. And so the nice thing about these days with analytics is that you can actually go in and make those meaningful decisions. Making the difficulty progression work for everyone. You can't make it too easy or too difficult, or you'll have huge player churn. That is probably by far the most difficult part of these games, especially when they go live, is having that balancing act of your progression. And one of the more important points as well is don't dumb down the game. It's a challenge to design sort of these hardcore games to appeal to a casual audience, but you can't make the game look to the RTS players or hardcore RTS players like you've just basically made it stupid, or they'll go, that's just a casual game, I don't want to play it. Just quickly, I'll go over this. So, I found the free-to-play model, as a game developer, I found the free-to-play model just awesome for me. One, because I can get analytics. I feel like I'm there with the fans of the game, making meaningful changes for them, and that's what it's all about for me, is making a game for the fans. It also allows sort of that new audience coming in who normally wouldn't play these games, and allows me, wow, the slides. I feel like I'm playing a game here, trying to get the slides to stay where they are. So free to play for me allows those casual players to get in for free and start trying out the game. Rather than slopping down $60 and going, wow, I hate this. And that was a big barrier to entrance, was this large price tag for these games. Whereas right now, it's like having a very long demo for them. And I'm also seeing, the free-to-play strategy titles are getting bigger with increasing power of the new tablets, casual RTS games. These are going to start appearing on the consoles. I'm seeing some amazingly innovative strategy titles aimed at wider audience, appearing from independents. Even downstairs, I see a bunch of games. I'm like, wow, these are great. One of them I want to call out, Endless Legend from Amplitude Studios. I was just playing that a couple of weeks ago. It's a great game. It hits the marks on a lot of levels here. It's got a very appealing UI system. The gameplay is really easy for casual players coming in, but it's also a very appealing game to a hardcore audience. Highly recommend it if you can get your hands on that. Give that one a play. That kind of speaks to a lot of things that I'm talking about here, and I get no money from that studio, but I will. So one of the things for the lessons learned is, make your game easy to play and hard to master. I think that is, even if you look at a game like Candy Crush Saga, it is easy to play, but boy, it's hard to master as you get up to some of the higher levels. People play for hours just trying to get through certain areas, and same thing with Clash of Clans. And the same thing applies to any of the hardcore RTS games. Allowing players to get in, feel like they're progressing, but at the higher levels, it's tough to get through a lot of these higher levels. And this is really, especially important for the casual players to feel as they get into the game like they're contributing and they're succeeding in the game, and more importantly, they're progressing in the game. So that progression is very, very important. I think if you look at games like Candy Crush Saga and Clash of Clans, you know, especially Candy Crush Saga, progression is very important. There's how many levels in there? Like 800? You can always, there's that apples dangling in front of you constantly. I think same thing with a lot of these RTS games. You can conceivably just keep adding levels and making the game harder and harder, and the hardcore players will love that. Lesson learned, make the tutorial skippable. If you can't get it into your game and make it part of the game, that's fun. Just make it skippable for your hardcore players. We did that on Age of Empires. We just put skip tutorial, and we could watch the hardcore players would skip over it. Anyways, you know, if you have any tutorials, make them, you know, short, text light, only explain the basics, and let the player discover some of the nuances of your game. You know, so don't explain the whole game. Don't be like George Lucas and explain all the intricate details. Leave some magic there for them. You know, make the PvP accessible to core players fast. It's like put a big button there that says battles. You know, hey, you know, hardcore players, if you want to be competitive, here's the button that you want to press. You know, the other thing that really helps out, I found, and I really want to start looking into this a lot more with the, you know, the next few games that I look at, is allowing benefits for veterans to mentor and turn casual players into hardcore. So allowing those hardcore players to get a benefit from the casual players. As casual players come in, they're not just fodder for them. They can get them into their clans, get them into their alliances. You've got some of the hardcore players who've been in there, you know, they want to act as sort of the father or mother figure, you know, start gifting stuff to these casual players and actually developing them. And you'd be surprised that there's so many people out there that are these clan leaders that will spend the time saying, oh, hey, you know, watch how I do this strategy and follow me, you know, put in systems for them. If, depending on the type of game, you can put a ping system in there for them so they can direct all of those other players. Maybe just give it to them as a gift. If you give them the ability to gift, you know, Clash of Clans kind of has this. Those players will use it, and I've seen some of the games, even some of the Kickside games, where people are giving out resources at huge levels. They're spending tons of money giving them out. You know, obviously we call them the whales. You know, even at Bigpoint, we have, you know, I think some Saudi prince that's spending somewhere in the neighborhood of, you know, a couple of $100,000 on one of the games. Wow, because look at that. I practiced well. I did almost right on time here. So, do we have any time for questions?
No.
No? Okay, well then.
So sorry.
So then, if you want, you can ask me questions after the show. I can give you my business card. You can email me.